Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Director's Playbook. I'm your host, Paul Lovelace, and today we're diving into an important topic every funeral home owner faces at some point, and that is succession planning. So what happens to your business when you step away one day? So with me today is Jason Gazaille from Funeral Directors Life. Hey, Jason, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me. Exciting.
And I'd love for you tell a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to the folks.
Yeah, so Jason Gazaille, I'm Vice President of Finance for FDLIC and Directors Investment Group. I've been with the company for a decade now, which is, it seems it's gone so fast. It's been great. It's been fun and exciting. But my job really is to talk to funeral home owners on a daily basis. We try to solve financial issues for funeral home owners through funeral home lending and funeral home accounting and that kind of thing. And so I oversee those areas, have a great team that does hard work every day and serves our clients. And so we get to have all the fun, I think. It's a fun job.
Well, I know if you like busy, you've been busy. And so I know that's fun. So, well, I know one reason you've been busy because this little statistic I'd like to share with you. So I came across this recently. 2021 NFDA came across their study that said 27% of independent funeral home owners plan to sell their business or retire within the next 5 years. So that's probably why you're so busy. So you think
We're
about
feeling
that. When you do the math, you think about 20,000 funeral homes in the United States, roughly, I think 17,000 approximately are independent. So that's about 4,600 that'll be selling their funeral home by 2026.
It's wild.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
I think we're kind of feeling that, the early stages of that, especially on the loan side. We're originating loans in a record amount annually nowadays, and so most of that is acquisition financing from private ownership to private ownership, and so yeah, I think there's a few things that are contributing to that. We'll get into that here in a little bit, I'm sure, but it's not stopping anytime soon, I don't think.
Well, I love it. Well, let's start with just some of the basics here. Let's just talk about succession planning. What is it? Why does it matter? Give us a brief definition, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So simply, succession planning, for in my perspective, is the process of preparing for a change in ownership or a transfer of ownership for a funeral home owner. And that's ownership of the funeral home, that's leadership of the funeral home. But realistically, it's more than just, a retirement plan. We don't want to put together retirement plans. We want to put together full, well thought out plans that give you as the owner control and less and reduced stress when it comes to thinking about your exit from the business, because that is such a huge event. So,
yeah,
and,
it's like your own version of mergers and acquisitions for Main Street instead of Wall Street, right?
That's right. That's what it is. And there's so much to think about too. It's there's people involved. It's not just the seller. It's not just the seller's family, but it's the buyer and the buyer's family. It's the staff of the funeral home that's been there through it all. And then also, most importantly, probably, is the community that is involved in that transition as well.
Yeah, I think not only that. Think about this: how many times does a funeral home owner sell their business in their lifetime? Probably once.
Yeah,
and
probably
so if you don't
once.
do something very often. Yeah, it's going to be obviously new to you and challenging, and potential for lots of mistakes that we can get into.
That's right.
I love it. So let me ask you this. Why do you think it's such a hot topic right now? I mean, what's driving all this demand, do you think?
What's really driving the activity that we're seeing, the succession activity that we're seeing, from what we're observing, how we're talking to our funeral home owners and that kind of thing, it's an aging ownership. I mean, we talk about the baby boomers, and we're always talking about baby boomers on, yes, they're aging out, they're starting to pass away and that kind of thing. But realistically, baby boomers are also thinking about retiring. And so that wave of baby boomers that are starting to think about retire or are retired or thinking about retiring is increasing exponentially, it feels like. and that's really kind of what's contributing to the activity that we're seeing.
Yeah, I guess you think about that on the pre-need side. We know that 10,000 baby boomers a day are turning 65 and have been for a number of years. I think projected out to 2040, something like that. So that's pretty powerful. But I guess it stands to reason that the current ownership is aging out at the same time, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, and two, you've got a heavily consolidating profession. You look at consolidation, the number of regional consolidators out there. Individuals or businesses that own 3 to 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 funeral homes and more. To increase margins and that kind of thing, have operational efficiencies. The number of those companies in the industry is also increasing. And so you couple a few of those together, then all of a sudden you've got a lot of opportunity out there for acquisition and succession.
Yeah, you mentioned the word consolidation, and that just made me think about all the different businesses that are impacted by that. I just know my neighbor was a plumber. He sold his business to a bigger plumbing company, doctors, dentists, banks. I mean, you just go down the road. It makes sense that it would also impact the funeral profession as well, don't you think?
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And we're seeing really since COVID back in 2020 and all that came with that, the added stress, the added anxiety of running a funeral home, we're seeing that exponentially increase, individuals who are starting to think about retiring and selling their funeral home, and what does the future for me hold? Can I do that again, or can I not do that again? And do I want to do that again?
Yeah, well, good deal. Let me just ask you this. What's one thing do you think every funeral home owner should know about succession planning? Just real basic.
Yeah, basic. It's not that difficult. I think that a lot of the individuals that we talk to just don't know where to start, and reassuring them that it's not difficult as long as you find the right partner and that kind of thing to help you through that. Then it can be simple. And once that plan is developed, then all of a sudden you have a roadmap, right? I mean, and a roadmap is easy to follow. I do it every day, or every time I go on a trip, I'm on my Google Maps or whatever it is, and I can get from point A to point B very easily. It's the same thing with a succession plan. Yeah.
Do you think current funeral home owners have successors in mind, or what happens if they don't have a successor, I should say?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the individuals that we're talking to here recently, they don't have someone in mind. Used to, I guess maybe 5-10 years ago, it felt like everyone pretty much, my children want to own the business, or I've got this particular employee that is the person that I would prefer to own the business once I'm done. And that's still occurring, not to say it's not, but the consistency of funeral home owners that don't have anyone in mind is increasing. And so, obviously, as part of your succession planning, part of that is to understand who the prospective buyers of your funeral home are, and making sure you're vetting those people.
I heard another stat recently too in that same study. They said 73% of those independent funeral owners do not have a successor in mind. In other words, there's no family member, there's no key employee, so they're at a bit of a loss, and so that's where they might need, some assistance, some expertise, some help, some guidance.
Yeah, and some funeral home owners that we've talked to have come to us and said, I always thought my children would take the business over, and but never really having those discussions with those children in depth, and they get to the end and they say, well, wait a minute, they don't really want to continue in the industry, or they don't want to take the funeral home owner over, and so that's a danger, obviously, of not having a good succession plan in place.
We just believe everything starts, everything that's beneficial or successful starts with a good plan, right? So what happens, I guess, to a business when there's not a good plan in place? I mean, what are you seeing when that happens?
Yeah, ultimately, at the end of the day, there are real financial consequences of not having a plan in place, and whether that comes through decreased value of the funeral home or developing a poor sales structure can have implications on taxes and legacy issues on the back end. How you're involved or how you desire to be involved or not involved in the business. Those are all things that are risks. The other thing too is, delaying the planning process can, we can't predict the future, right? And so we're all human. We all get sick. We don't know when we're going to leave this earth. But predicament where you don't have a plan in place and you pass away, that could burden your actual family and the employees that are employed by the funeral home and that kind of thing. And so some of those
I've
are
seen stories where it's not, they didn't pass away, but their health took a turn for the worse.
exactly
They weren't able to be as involved. And so ultimately, as a consequence, the value of their business went down.
no
And
doubt.
if you think about, that's their nest egg, that's their retirement. And all of a sudden it was worth a lot less than it was prior to their health change, right?
Right. Exactly right.
So that's super
Yeah.
unfortunate.
It is.
Well, good. That's one of the things we advocate, is just getting started early, and maybe that's a good tip to take away today for our listeners. So let's talk about just a little bit about the options that are out there. So I've heard a lot about the multiples that are being generated today for funeral homes. Can you explain kind of what you're seeing with multiples and what that means, et cetera?
Yeah, so I'd say, a decade ago when we looked at multiples, and really what we're talking about when we talk about multiples are at the basis of a funeral home's value, it comes down to two numbers, and that's your adjusted revenue and that's your adjusted EBITDA. And EBITDA is simply your cash flow. It stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. But realistically, and it's more about cash flow. And so net income is important, yes, but it's not the number your funeral home is valued on. But when, about 10 years ago, we were the industry when it came to acquisitions and that kind of thing, we were about 4 to 6 times cash flow. And that was more aligned with about 1.5 times revenue or so. And now with consolidation, with more competition, and some other factors, we're seeing multiples range in somewhere between 6 to 8 times, a little bit higher sometimes if, say, for instance, the funeral home that's in question offers a large synergy to a buyer, then they may be willing to pay more. But realistically, about 6 to 8 times, which equates to roughly 2 times revenue. When we talk about revenue, we're talking about top line revenue minus your cash advance income, because obviously cash advance income is not value, it shouldn't be included in the value of a funeral home, as well as any other kind of revenue that is unique to the current ownership.
Man, I should have bought a funeral home many years ago.
I know, good investment.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I'm happy for them. It's a difficult profession, and so I'm glad that they get the payoffs that they deserve. But we know this; it's somewhat cyclical. I mean, we've been doing this a long time, and we've seen that cycle up and down. And so right now, we feel like for individuals who are looking to sell their funeral, might be a good time to at least explore those options. From what I'm hearing, you
no
get
doubt.
2 times revenue, or 6 to 8 times cash flow is what you're saying, right?
Yes, yeah, and some, when we talk about 8 times EBITDA, or we talk about 2 times revenue, those are premiums. So if the funeral home is a high value funeral home, then we may push it to those multiples. But on the average, somewhere between that 1.75 to 2 times revenue, or 6 to 8 times EBITDA, is about what we're seeing in the market right now.
Well, I guess at the end of the day, it's only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. So
Exactly right.
that's what you have to look at. Is there a qualified buyer? Is someone competing for that, and so forth. So I love it. Well, let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing there in the marketplace with some success stories where that funeral home has desired to sell their business, and it just all came together. You got anything come to mind to you?
Yeah, there is one, and we talk about succession planning not being a 1 year plan, right? I mean, when you've made the decision to sell your business and your goal is to sell it in 1 year, you've probably waited too late to start succession planning. I had a funeral home approach me in 2017 about their desire for the future, right? And this was just a conversation that we were having. And they said, hey, in the next 5 years or so, we are really wanting to exit the business, and they wanted to. And you've got some options when you exit the business, So you can hang around and act as a consultant. You can work. You can serve families. We see a lot of owners doing that. A lot of prior owners doing that. But then you do have owners that are just wanting to exit the business and move to the lake, right? And so 2017 met with them, really just wanted to develop kind of what their vision was, and just ask them, what's the vision post sale for you guys together as a husband and a wife. And so we talked about that for a while, and we put a number of years on it. It's 5 to 7 years. Realistically, this is kind of what we want to do. That particular funeral home sold in 2024, quarter one, 2024. So that first conversation was in 2017, and they sold a funeral home quarter one of 2024, and they got very good value, and it was a very smooth transition. During that period, those 7-8 years, whatever that looked like. We covered a lot of different areas, and one of those was, who do you want to sell it to? And we had multiple meetings about that. We developed a list of individuals that we felt like would be interested in the funeral home, and we, at the end of the day, I think when we completed that list, we had about 9 prospects. Some were single, private buyers with maybe one rooftop in business right now, and some of them had a bunch of funeral homes, and they were what we consider a regional consolidator, and ultimately we explored each of those different options, had some of those interviews with the seller and the prospective buyers, and ended up landing on one that it all came together. And then when you think about it, there's a lot of ground to cover when it comes to selling your funeral home. There's the structure of the sale, making sure that the buyer and the seller are comfortable with that, making sure that due diligence is done. So backing up what the financial statements are telling us, with contract analysis and all of that kind of stuff. And so that process, ultimately took about a year when we identified the buyer, and then came to fruition there in early 2024.
That sounded like that was a win-win for everybody, right? I love it.
It was, yeah, and they're enjoying retirement, and are not involved in the business anymore, and that was that healthy balance of transparency between the buyer and the seller. This is what we desire as the sellers, and does that align with you as the buyer? And that all came together and worked out for both parties.
I'm just curious, did they get the highest price by chance?
They did.
They actually got the highest price.
Yeah, they did. They did, and that was through some negotiation, obviously. But in this particular case, the buyer buying the funeral home, when they bought this funeral home, the synergy that they had with another couple locations went through the roof, and so they have a lot of efficiency, a lot of sharing between another location that they have, and so they can afford to pay a little bit more.
Yeah, so that was just a good fit all around. Sounds like
100%.
I love it. Well, that's fun to hear. Those things are great. The reason I asked about the price is because I've heard stories about where funeral homes sold to the highest price, but it was just a nightmare after the fact, and they basically had seller's remorse to the nth degree because they wish they would have sold it for a lower price because it wasn't what they expected. Have you ever seen that happen in some of your experience?
Yeah, we've seen that again with increased activity. We're seeing more and more, success stories, and also stories that the sellers wish would have gone a little bit differently. But that really goes back in each of those instances that we see maybe some seller's remorse. We're seeing that there wasn't really a good solid plan behind them. We had a funeral home in Oklahoma, kind of a rural area, which Oklahoma is kind of like Texas. It's spread out, and there's a lot of rural areas. When you have a rural funeral home, then all of a sudden your service area stretches, and so this particular funeral home was a single rooftop location, and served about a 70-mile radius. And which is big. I mean, from the south end of their radius to the north, it's 140 miles. They're serving about 90 families a year, and with no real plan, and so they ended up getting an offer that was the highest offer, and just took it immediately, and without giving too much detail away, we are currently in discussion, because we like to keep these relationships, right? So when someone sells a funeral home, I like to check in with them and just make sure that things are, seeing how they're doing in retirement and that kind of thing. And so we keep that line of communication open, but they are now not happy with what's happened. When you sell to the wrong buyer, and you had a great team that is left at the funeral home, then and they're calling you and saying, "Hey, this is happening, and I'm not a fan of it, and I'm not crazy about it." Then as that prior owner that you've built this business, you've built this team, you start to question, did I make the right decision, and what action can I take now, if any, to kind of help these people, help the community, and that kind of thing. And so, actually, they are, they're contemplating going back into business.
Back in, all right.
And trying to heal that situation in that way. And so
that sounds like just operational continuity, where they weren't really operating in the way they thought they were after the sale, and that can get complicated sometimes. And that's one mistake you see. But are there any other mistakes that come to mind from some of the deals that funeral homeowners can make when they come to sell the funeral home?
There are. We talked about waiting too late to start this succession planning, or starting to think about this, making some assumptions about who will take over your business without really effectively communicating about it. And so, whether that's your children, whether that's a managing director you have there, or a long-term employee that you feel like would love to have the business, if you're not addressing that with them consistently, then that could be a problem. Either they find another opportunity, or they just, you don't know that they don't really want to own the funeral home. So those are two. Not documenting the plan. So we are big here as a company, FDLIC, about planning and documenting those plans and writing them down and making sure that we know what the vision is, and all the different components of how we're going to accomplish the mission. But if you don't document the plan and something does happen to you, then, and it's all in your head, then all of a sudden, if something does happen, then your family, your wife or your children or your husband, are left guessing, and left in a spot that they have to kind of figure out the problem without you as the owner.
I know one of the things I hear is, after the sale, how much prices change for the consumers. I mean, especially in a publicly traded company situation where prices are sometimes 30-40% higher after the sale. Maybe not immediately, because they'll say something like, nothing will change, everything will stay the same. And that is true maybe for a little while, but the next thing you know, prices are a lot higher, and the former owners are upset about that, because that's not the way they ran their business. And so you've seen something like that before?
100%. And in fact, Paul, I've got a situation right now where it's the opposite. It's prices. They got into a pricing war, and so all of a sudden their averages came way down, and they're more of a low cost higher volume funeral home. And so it's those legacies, the vision of the legacy that the seller has and what the buyer has. Those need to mesh.
Yes.
And be in line with each other. And also, for the funeral home owner who's selling their funeral home, and they are open to continuing in the business in some degree, whether it be serving families part-time or consulting with the owner. That is a huge asset. And so if you're considering selling your funeral home, then really consider being involved in the first 1 to 3 years. In that transition period where you can have some influence because you've built this business, and a lot of buyers are hungry for that. They're welcoming to that because it's certainly an asset to them to have you on board.
One thing I was just thinking about real quick is another mistake that happens is sometimes there's no proper expectation set on the investment back in the business from the new owner. Mm-hmm. So, for example, they were not investing in people or the facilities, and so over time, they're not the same as they once were, and so in the former owner's mind, they're going, "Hey, this building is going downhill, and the parking lot needs to be resurfaced, and the technology needs to be improved." I mean, all these things happen, and so that just creates disappointment. You seen that?
It does, yeah, and I think that's one of the mistakes that are made, are not having a good expectation of what the value of the funeral home is, and so it's very important for a seller to understand what the value is and what a reasonable sales price is. That way, the buyer can upkeep the facilities and make sure that they're able to buy things that enhance the experience of the families and the legacy and that kind of thing. And so we sometimes see funeral home purchasers pay too much for a funeral home, and all of a sudden they're cash strapped at the very start, and can't do some of those things that they need to. I mean, parking lots are a major expense, and if you don't stay on top of that, then it becomes an even bigger expense later on down the road.
Yeah, I don't have the technical experience you do in that area, but I just know from a general concept, the trust level needs to be high. That both parties can do what they say they're going to do, that they're going to be reliable, and that they're going to deliver what they promised, and that to me makes an important part of the sale.
Oh, 100%. I agree.
All right, well, good deal. Well, let's transition a little bit about next steps. If there's some of our audience here may not know where to start. I mean, what if you were going to tell a funeral home owner where to begin? What's a good next step for them?
Yeah, so I mean, we do like to break it into steps because that's the biggest problem for funeral home owners who are thinking about succession, is where do I jump in? And so again, I'll kind of break it down step by step on how we approach things. But first is having that initial vision plan, right? And so that's twofold. It's what's the vision for the funeral home post-transaction or post-sale? What do I have as the current owner, in my head for the vision of this funeral home going forward? And then what do I have? What am I looking for in retirement as well? And so if we can begin with those two things, and all of a sudden that gives us clarity on how to kind of start to build this plan. While you're doing that, then grooming. If you do have a key person, grooming them early, communicating with them early, letting them know that, hey, this is kind of what I have in mind, whether that be your children or whether that be a key employee. Having those conversations early and having that transparency early only increases trust and gives them something to look forward to. One thing that we see a lot of is our financial statements and what I would call books not being healthy. And so we like to say, hey,
your financial statements have to be current and accurate, and
they
turn
do.
them in on a big chief notebook.
Yeah. They do. They need to be because if not, then that's going to it's going to affect future value and that kind of thing. So as early as we can get started on making sure accounting is working like it needs to, making sure that you have a solid piece of technology that's helping you create contracts and that kind of thing. That's extremely important. And so that's that third step. Fourth is again, is using operational efficiencies, using technology, making sure that you have what you need to be able to, when the time comes, show a prospective buyer what yes, here's my financial statements, but here's my actual performance. And
So they're positioning their business for sale all along, right?
exactly right. Yeah, I mean, really from the time they open, right? If you open a funeral home when you're 25 years old, then that's when you really need to start doing some of these things, and that's part of it. Part of succession planning. Once your books are in order, once you have that technology, then getting your funeral home valued is key by someone who has expertise in the profession, right? And so a lot of times we see a funeral home owner go to a non-industry evaluation company, and that's a problem because they don't really understand the business. And that's why, that's why we focus on funeral homes as a company. We serve funeral homes because that's the profession that we understand and we've committed
So can a
to.
funeral home owner get a valuation anytime they want? I mean, they don't have to have anything
Yeah.
signed official.
No, they can get them anytime you want, for any reason you want. We see people who just are curious about the value of their funeral home mid-career, and that's perfectly fine. But evaluation is an extremely important part of the succession plan, and a lot of times, you'll get it valued maybe twice, 2 times, and you start with, hey, I'm thinking about retiring in 5 to 10 years. I'm going to go ahead and get it valued now, and then that way I can measure the value that I've created in these next 5 to 10 years, and I can see that visually. So having that valuation, getting a trusted advisor team together. That's your CPA, that's your attorney, that's your lender. That's very, very important to have a lender that really understands the business, and then potentially a broker. If that in each situation is different, but a broker, the right broker can sometimes really help communication between buyer and seller and that kind of thing.
Yeah, especially if you don't have that key person in mind as a potential successor.
Exactly
a
right.
broker could be that solution, even though you may end up, the buyer may end up paying more. The seller might be a better overall fit for everybody, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, yeah, and they have the expertise too. And again, you can approach that different ways. Sometimes brokers are not necessary. Sometimes they are, but it's not really a one-size-fits-all situation either. Again, in the last step, we've gone through all these steps. The last step is thinking about yourself and your family. So, what do you want to accomplish after the sale? What do you want your life to look like? What objectives and goals do you have personally? And how does that align with the sale of the funeral home? So you've got some options. Again, we mentioned earlier, you can stay on as a consultant. You can stay on part-time. You can exit the business completely. You need to clearly define what you want to do there. And then at the end of the day, once the sale occurs, then execute that post-retirement phase of your life.
Man, I love it. That's so important. That's good stuff right there. And I think just for all of our listeners here, this is a great content. Hopefully got their creative juices flowing, maybe got them thinking about some ideas and places to start. And so, Jason, I know this has been very insightful, very informative. And so thank you for your time today.
Of course.
I appreciate you sharing with us. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on this edition of the Director's Playbook. If you found value in today's conversation, be sure to subscribe and visit us online. And we look forward to seeing you all next time. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.